Hi, I'm Jack Howell. Who has one of these? If you do, you know something about the topic of this video. Obviously, I am not a doctor. None of what I am about to say should be construed as medical advice. I am speaking purely from my experience as a clarinet player and teacher. I've had a university studio for just about 30 years, and it seems that nearly every year at least one of my students has reported pain while playing the clarinet. And as their teacher, I'm usually first on the scene. As I look around my orchestra, there are injuries everywhere, past and present. Bassoonists and harpists with bad shoulders, oboists and flutists with carpal tunnel syndrome, percussionists with bad backs, string players with bad, you name it. I've been injured myself. We usually think of injuries as happening to our hands, but we're kind of vulnerable all over. So, if you are experiencing persistent pain, first, see a doctor and get a diagnosis. Tendinitis is a different thing from carpal tunnel syndrome, which is different from nerve impingement or trigger finger or any of the other dozens of things that might be wrong. So nothing I say is intended to help you diagnose yourself or to replace medical attention. Let's say, though, that you've taken the pills and you've done the therapy and you've seen the specialists, and either you're still hurt or you still feel vulnerable. No doctor can be you. No doctor can do what you do, can feel what you feel. And doctors may be able to help the pain, but if they can't fix the underlying problem, masking the pain may eventually make things worse. At some point, it may be up to you to figure out what happened and what to do about it. So, this video is not a quick, specific, what to do if it hurts here video. That would be irresponsible and legally indefensible. I am going to talk about injuries generally, philosophically, in the context of the clarinet playing system and with some of my own ideas that may or may not help. The idea of getting hurt playing music often seems weird to non-musicians. Yeah, our work is mostly inside with no heavy lifting. However, we musicians are athletes of the small muscles. To produce an orchestral tone on any instrument requires delivery of a very large of energy to a very small target. And at some point in our careers, many of us, perhaps most of us, will come to a point where our minds write a check that our bodies can't cash. Cruelly, and I guess predictably, pain often seems to visit those who are working the hardest and who most desire improvement. A flutist friend of mine years ago won a one-year position in a major symphony. Determined to parlay this opportunity into a permanent job, she started practicing 7 hours a day and wound up with racking pain in focal dystonia and a long recovery. Preparing for recital or audition or having a busy stretch of gigs is a classic scenario for an onset of tendinitis or worse. Extra practice, extra tension, a feeling of urgency that makes us push through the warning twinges, a feeling that we've just got to suck it up and deal with the consequences later. Then it's later, and maybe it later comes sooner than we thought. Everyone is different. Every circumstance, every injury is different, but often there is a sense that if we could go back in time and do things differently, it might have been avoided. The problem is we don't realize there's a problem until it's too late. Things tend to work fine until they don't. A way of playing or thinking that was fine for 2 hours a day can't handle 6 or 8 hours a day. Or what your body handled without effort at 22 becomes a problem at 36. So, I will present 4 separate points. Different dimensions to injury, not all of which will apply to everyone. If you're lucky, none of them will apply to you. These points are awareness, technique, general health, and emotional health. First, awareness. A couple of years ago, the brilliant jazz guitarist Julian Lage performed at a theater that happened to be walking distance from my house. He gave a master class before the concert, which of course I attended. And he talked at length about his own battle with focal dystonia. Lage was a child prodigy who matured very early into a jazz great. But at some point, I guess his late 20s or early 30s, his hands started disobeying his brain. For as long as he could remember, his hands had been obedient soldiers, executing his brain's orders infallibly, but suddenly they mutinied. Focal dystonia is spooky. I don't pretend to know anything about it. I've had a number of friends and colleagues who have suffered from it. There are some pretty high-profile cases, and there are some radical therapies. Lage's story was long, and it's not my story, so I'll cut to the chase. Lage rewired himself. He said that his hands failed because he had been using them to execute without actually feeling. This hammering resulted in pain, which his brain ignored, but his body didn't. To protect itself, Lage's body sabotaged him. It rerouted the neural signals that were causing pain to somewhere else, which stopped the activity and thus the pain. Lage said he had to learn to use his fingers to feel again. During his recovery, playing just one note, but really, truly feeling it might be an entire day's worth of practice. Then one interval, one shift, completely relearning his instrument. It was tedious, it was excruciating, but Lage was willing to do whatever it took. And it's inspirational that he recovered and he's now playing better than ever. You should look him up, Julian Lage. We can learn from his experience. And thankfully, we don't need to descend to his depths to do it. We don't even need to be injured to benefit from his experience. Now, how much effort does it take to depress a clarinet key? Very little. How much do we actually use? Maybe a lot, particularly if we're not paying attention. As I mentioned at the beginning, injuries with musicians, as with all athletes, tend to manifest on an occasion. A recital, an audition, a change in technique, an increase in stress or workload. It seems like the injuries just happened. But I think Lage's point about feeling, not merely executing, is crucial, not just for injury prevention, but for learning in general. As I have said in a number of videos, when something becomes habitual, we lose sensation of it. So I believe we should strive to make a habit of awareness, of feeling tension, being aware of our level of tension, feeling the rings centered under our fingertips, feeling our tendons rippling in our forearms, our fingers moving with a light springiness, feeling the muscular set of our embouchure, the solidity of our diaphragm and our air support. There are endless things that deserve attention, but often when we get hurt, it is because we ignored the warnings to which we would have paid attention if we had known what we know now. Pain is often the only way our bodies can get our attention, because when we feel great, we take it for granted. Pain usually whispers long before it screams. However, for whatever reason, like I said, the importance of the concert, the difficulty of changing habitual technique, we tend to ignore the whispers. But if we learn to hear the whispers and adjust our attention, our practice schedule, our technique, if we can make the whispers go away instead of letting them turn into screams, we will have better lives and longer careers. When one of my students reports pain, we immediately stop and figure out what's hurting, and then how to make the motion that hurts without hurting. and then how to practice feeling the non-hurting version. It's not necessarily that easy, but that's what I can do without getting sued for practicing medicine without a license. One of my tricks is to switch hands. Now, you can't play very much, but if you have the right hand on top, left hand on the bottom, this gives you a completely unfamiliar position that forces us to feel our fingers as though we were beginners. And a lot of times that will establish a feedback channel that habit has erased. So we should strive to feel, to keep the feedback loop open and to reestablish it if it is lost. That's awareness. Now, I talk about this in a lot of other videos about technique. Now, and that's the second dimension of injury, is technique. And maybe it's a fallacy to separate awareness from technique. I've known very good players whose technique appeared to be textbook, probably just like Julian Lage's did, but wound up with injuries because excess tension became habitual. They didn't feel it, or they ignored the whispers and kept pushing. Conversely, there are players whose technique appears to be a complete mess, but who play beautifully and never become injured. Now, this may be because they have built relaxation and feel into an unorthodox technique, or it just may be a happy accident of genetics. There are a lot of activities where proper technique is essential to injury prevention. Weightlifting comes to mind. I talk about this technique, not weightlifting, in my video, The Wisdom of Robert Marcellus, Hand Position and Finger Motion. And that video actually has about all I have to say on the subject, which is basically biomechanics. And biomechanics are huge in most sports. I won't bore you with comparisons to golf or tennis or cycling, but a great deal of improvement in these sports in the past couple of decades has come from scientific study of the motions involved. And this is where we bring awareness back together with technique. So experiment with me. Take your hand and slowly contract your fingers as though you're squeezing a ball. Feel the tendons and muscles moving. Be aware of the tension involved. Now, relax your arm and hand completely and wiggle your fingers, moving only at the big knuckle. I'm sure you can feel the difference. And I'm sure you can see how, if you were designing a machine to operate a clarinet key, you would give it one pivot point, not three. And how neurologically it takes more electricity to coordinate a complex motion than a simple one. And how, if you were constructing a mechanism that was actuated with a cable, like a tendon, you would give that cable the straightest pull and the fewest kinks possible. Now, as a teacher, I never try to change mechanics for cosmetic reasons. If you have great speed and accuracy and fluidity, I don't care how it looks. But if you have insufficient speed or accuracy or fluidity, I think it would be irresponsible to encourage you to simply work harder, because that is where injury lives. With fundamental technique, we want to build a race car, not a school bus. Don't try to make a slow thing go fast. Make a fast thing. Race car parts are as light and meticulously engineered and precisely constructed as possible, because the rational approach to speed is to make a fast vehicle from the beginning. If you try and make a school bus go fast, you will simply break lots of parts and still lose to the race car. So, don't take this personally. Every player is different. It is certainly possible to get injured using the best possible technique. However, just like faulty technique can limit a player's speed, accuracy, and fluidity, it can also make a player more injury prone. I am not claiming a perfect correlation, but many of my students over the years who battled injury were trying to do with effort and determination what better might have been achieved with improved mechanics. Now, changing technique as I already suggested, can be its own source of tension. But we should think back to Julian Lage playing one note a day. If he can fight back from focal dystonia, we can change a hand position that is causing pain. So, awareness, technique, they're the same thing and also different things. And also, we may not be talking biomechanically only about our fingers. There may be an issue with your posture, or the angle of your wrists, or extraneous movement in your arms, or tension in your shoulders that goes down to your fingers. A search for healing might take you to Alexander technique, or a specialist in functional medicine, or maybe to yoga. And speaking of different places, some of my injured students have had jaw issues, TMJ, which is an entirely different kettle of fish. But whatever it is, an ultimate solution often involves both awareness and mechanical change. So, third dimension of injury is general health. With awareness and technique, we've been talking about playing our instrument as much as possible in harmony with our bodies. Assuming that has been sorted, how much training the body will tolerate varies from person to person. Many great athletes seem blessed with genetics that allow them to train harder than others without injury. But we only get one body apiece. So whatever cards we were dealt, I think our objective should be to make that body capable of as much work as possible without injury. And I believe that sleep, diet, exercise have a direct bearing on how much and how effectively you can work. Now, I'm the blackest of pots to be calling out kettles, and music is full of stories of musicians pulling off Herculean efforts of practicing for the win. When you're 18 or 20, your body may take it. My first years of college, I had this idea that if I slept more than I practiced any given day, I wasn't working hard enough. As you will hopefully have read by now in Molly Gebrian's book, research has shown that I was a complete idiot. Whatever else you do, apples to apples, you will learn faster and perform better if you get enough sleep. Also, enough exercise. You can overdo anything, so don't go out and hurt yourself exercising. But I've come to believe that resistance to physical stress correlates with resistance to psychological stress. Better blood flow, better oxygen uptake, more energy. What's not to like? Now, I've put on a few pounds since my PSO audition, but in 2015, I was in the best shape of my life. As part of my preparation, I got back on the bike, lost 30 pounds, got my resting pulse below 50 beats per minute, got my functional threshold power up to about 3.8 watts per kilogram. For a time, I became a moderately respectable endurance athlete for one purpose: to play my PSO audition in the best shape of my life. Being in great shape meant I had more energy, I slept better, I had more confidence that no matter what else happened in my audition, I was not going to be tired. I felt great. I felt so good that when I caught a cold right before the final round, I thought, right, I planned for this. I have health points in the bank. And while I had experienced occasional problems with tendinitis in the past, I had no issues in my prep, despite working harder for longer than I ever had in my life. Now, I'm not saying you should do what I did or that you won't get injured if you do, but a rising tide raises all ships. And if I say that physical exercise benefits every system in your body, including your brain, I don't think a doctor would disagree with me. And if you do get tendinitis, the doctor will probably prescribe physical therapy, where they will give you exercises. Ask me how I know. You will endeavor to lessen the strain through exercise on the injured tissues by strengthening the tissues around them. So why not go on the offensive? You might even do some research and find specific stretching and strengthening for your hands and wrists, even if you feel great. I have plenty of exercises, but I am not giving medical advice. There are licensed physical therapists for that. Taking care of yourself also means paying attention to what you eat. When you're young, you can eat a Snickers and 3 microwave burritos and feel fine. But sooner or later, that behavior will catch up with you, and it may be how you least expect. I don't have any specific dietary advice. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan. I eat anything I'm not allergic to. And there will be those who say a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. However, I personally have found that to be not quite true. If you look at elite athletes in any sport, you'll find a focus on nutrition. If you're under stress, giving your body the nutrients it needs may help prevent an injury, even if only tangentially. I understand there's time, there's expense. I've eaten my share of ramen and bacon cheeseburgers. But if you are trying to recover from an injury, or if you are making a maximum effort, it may be worth the trouble to cook fresh ingredients rather than stopping at the fast food drive-thru. As the punchline to the old joke goes, it can't wait. There, that's my pitch for overall health, our third point. I've always said winning an audition is a matter of becoming the best possible version of yourself. And the best possible version of yourself is well-rested, feels great, well-nourished, and, in my opinion, thus has a lower chance of being hurt. Now, fourth point. Let's talk about the mind and emotional health. I am no more a shrink than I am a doctor, and I have no idea who you are. These thoughts are purely from my experience as a player and teacher. So we've talked about awareness and technical component to injuries. We've talked about the holistic health component. For some injuries, not all injuries, put the pitchfork down, there is a psychological or emotional component. This is a very tricky thing to talk about, and I actually don't want to talk about it, but I've lived it. I've seen it in students, and for someone, it might be the missing piece of the puzzle. And if it is that missing piece, the person who needs it will be angry. Playing a musical instrument is a voluntary activity. I mean, yeah, there's a contract that obliges us to play a certain number of notes, and sometimes that's the problem. But that's not what I mean. When we play, every action begins with a thought, or a feeling, or some mysterious combination of the two. We apply our bodies to our instruments in such a way that this thought/feeling is produced and becomes audible. And when our minds and bodies and instruments become one thing and create beauty, that's addictive. That's what makes us want to be this thing for the rest of our lives. And when we become this thing and it reaches out and moves another human being emotionally, that's magical, literally. Action at a distance. So mind, body, instrument, must not forget the mind. This is starting to get awkward, so I'll tell you a story. When I played the bass clarinet audition for the PSO, that was the 4th final round I had played for a permanent position in the PSO. And I prepared much differently than I had ever prepared before. I accepted, even embraced the possibility of failure. I stopped fearing it, and I began playing a serious game of let's see how good I can get. Before that, I tended to win auditions I didn't really care about. And when I really cared, I would practice myself into a state and lose. So I'm going to tell you about one of those failures, the 1999 audition for second clarinet. In that audition, I was one of 3 finalists, and there was no winner. The next year, I was runner-up to Ron Samuels. In the weeks leading up to the 1999 audition, I practiced and prepared obsessively. My mantra was that somebody might outplay me, but nobody was going to outwork me. And I began experiencing lower back pain. which got worse and worse. By the time of the audition, I could barely walk and I slept terribly. I put it down to all the time I'd spent hunched over my reed dual making reeds. I went to a doctor, I went to a chiropractor, I tried acupuncture, nothing helped. I was not old, I had no degenerative disease. There was nothing apparently physically wrong, but I was in tremendous pain. This was not new. I had had such episodes before. A couple of years earlier in New Zealand, I had this same searing, immobilizing lower back pain. I went to I'll call her a healer in Wellington. I was looking for a chiropractor and she was recommended. I was expecting that usual crack, snap, Bob's your uncle chiropractic treatment, and this was totally not that. Anyway, she did some feeling around and manipulation, and she asked, "Why are you here?" I said, "What do you mean, why am I here? My back hurts. I just spent 22 hours in an economy airline seat. My back has always been dodgy, and it's out." She shook her head, maybe a bit impatiently, and she said, "That's not why you're here. There's nothing wrong with you. You know the reason you're here. You just don't know that you know it." I didn't know what to do with that other than deny it. But after my PSO audition experiences, I started to put two and two together. And I realized that my back pain had often coincided with emotional distress. My back was manifesting my inner turmoil. The healer had been right. When I look back, I could see the connection that I couldn't see at the time, which is normal. We never see these things at the time. At the time, we always deny it. I read a book by Dr. John Sarno. I think it was called The Mind-Body Connection. It's been a while ago. Long story, slightly shorter. I have not had lower back pain since. Now, why am I telling you this story? Well, because it's my story, which may or may not resonate with you. It's my personal anecdotal example of an emotional or psychological component to an injury. Sometimes the pain is real, but the injury is not. Sometimes a fear of failure is a seed that grows into an injury. Now, not always. Put the pitchfork down. I'm not saying that your herniated disc is all in your head. But even if the injury is real, the activity is voluntary. If you push to yourself to the point of injury, if you played with too much tension, why? And keep asking yourself, why? It's a tricky business, and I am glad I'm not a doctor. You can't tell the person in pain that it's in their head. I certainly didn't believe it, but neither should you risk potential negative side effects of treating an injury that doesn't actually exist, which is why so many of us with playing injuries wind up trying alternative treatments. The doctors can't do anything because they can't find anything to do, and their Hippocratic oath prevents them from just doing stuff. But we're still in pain, and we want somebody to do something. Now, if you're taking this personally, you might be angry, and I'm sorry. But I can't leave this part out. It might be the key. If not now, maybe someday. And if the idea of pain having an emotional or psychological cause has touched a nerve, so to speak, maybe there's a reason for that. Not saying, just saying. This might be a good time to break out Tomo Fujita's guitar wisdom. Don't worry, don't compare, don't expect too fast, be kind to yourself. You are mind and body. There's no real conclusion to this video. Everyone is different. You may be injured and feel that none of what I said applies to you. Again, I never advise against medical attention or conventional treatment, and nothing I have said is intended to diagnose or treat any condition or disease. I hope that satisfies the legal department. Ideally, some ibuprofen, some physical therapy, and a little rest fixes the problem, and it never comes back. For many, though, it's not that easy. Not everyone is in a financial or geographical position to enjoy extensive medical attention or to engage complementary medicine specialists. And even if you are in that position, I've had colleagues and students who have spent many thousands of dollars on specialists and acupuncture and massage and electrical stimulation and Alexander technique and magnets and supplements without finding a solution. If you are injured, there is a non-zero probability that you will ultimately be required to take responsibility for your own healing, that you will be required to look inside and, like Julian Lage, do what it takes. And if you are not injured, perhaps you have a better appreciation for how valuable that status is and may be freshly motivated to preserve it. If you're obsessed, why not be obsessed enough to build injury prevention into your program? I know this was a long, dense video. It might be more easily digestible as a magazine article. I don't have a magazine. This channel is the connection that you and I have. And I really, truly hope it helped. Thanks for watching.